Well, it's 3 o'clock, and I know that Katie's the only one we don't know for sure is going to be here or not. But we'll go ahead and call this meeting to order, and she can join us as she comes to the meeting. I'll go ahead and open us up with a word of prayer. Father, thank you so much for bringing these citizens of the great city of Kerrville to this meeting and volunteering their time to service to this city. Bless the decisions that we make, and let us ever be mindful of you in those decisions. For your name I pray. Amen. All right, item number 2 is the Visitor Citizens Forum, and I've been told we don't have anyone to speak today. So we'll move on to item number 3, which is approval of the minutes. You have a copy of those minutes in front of you, and those minutes are from the March 24th workshop.
It was April.
So we need to change that. I was thinking that was, so the date on here shows March 25th. It was actually April 25th.
April 24th, wasn't it?
And then it says 24th down here, so correct.
I'll correct it.
Yeah, so.
Move approval.
Have a motion to approve. Do it in a second. Any other changes to the minutes that you notated? I hear none. All those in favor of the minutes being approved with the changes to the dates, raise your right hand. Any opposed to that?
I wasn't here.
Oh, you weren't here, so you're electing not to vote. So that is unanimous. I thought, uh-oh, something's wrong. That makes sense.
I
though.
wasn't here.
I get it. All right.
Don't know what happened.
Minutes are approved.
I was here. I don't know.
I guess there were 2 inside of that, right? 2
There
sets.
was a workshop and a meeting.
So I called it a workshop. I forgot we had a meeting shortly after that to approve. So do you want to amend your motion to include both sets of minutes?
So moved. Second.
And your second? All right, and then we'll revote. So all in favor, raise your right hand. And we don't have to, you know what to do on the minutes for the next time. All right, item number 4 is monthly reports.
So,
Julie?
very simple financial update, looks very similar to what you saw last month, minus the interest revenue to date change. I did go ahead and plug in the committed project there for the comp plan study, and so just updating your fund balance to reflect the interest revenue. Right now, we're still making over 5%, so that's helping us out really in all funds. So projected fiscal year 24, assuming that the remaining 57,000 in outstanding property taxes collected will be 583,000. And so I'll get another update from Bob at the end of the month and then change that for the next meeting. And I didn't put this in the presentation, but I just wanted to note that we did work through a potential cash flow forecast, which we can discuss as you go through your procedures if you want to, but that was really to aid in that decision-making process as you talked through project procedures and those kind of things. This is something we've done for EIC that's been pretty helpful for us as we've talked about money moving forward and what we anticipate that to look like. The one thing that I would point out that Kenneth brought to my attention that sometimes I assume people know what I'm thinking. The potential project line there where I have $150,000 plugged in every year, that was just assuming that we did projects totaling that amount so that you could see the change to the fund balance. There's nothing committed there or no ask pending or anything like that. It's really just a plug just to kind of let you see if there was some activity even on a smaller scale, what that looks like to your fund balance. And then part of Mr. Gamble's request was to have a reserve fund balance. So I did plug that reserve fund balance in there as well. So just to show you what the impact was year over year. So if anyone has any questions on that, we can discuss it now, or if you want to bring this back as we get into your procedures, we can certainly do that. Okay.
Questions?
The total cash then in the fund is the unrestricted fund balance plus the reserve funds.
That's right.
So that's, okay.
Mhm.
Plus the unexpended expenditure.
Yeah.
Right.
So you gotta add those in.
No,
Yeah, it's just kind of, really, this is kind of a living cash
Okay.
flow so that we can make modifications to it,
I understand
you know,
that.
as the board sees fit, or if projects change or anything like that, we can quickly update it with the way the model's built out, so that we
So
can
were
bring
there,
this back.
were there rules established around the reserve fund? It's just there as a notation?
Right, unless this board chooses to do that, really the only funds that we have reserved for right now is general fund and water, and that's because there's GASB standards and accounting rules about that.
Okay.
Other boards don't necessarily have to have a fund balance, but it's never a bad idea. We've talked about it a little bit with EIC too, just what is your comfort level as far as maintaining at all times, so we don't basically bring it to zero.
And why would this board need a reserve fund? Right, because we're pledging funds that
Yep.
they have to be current.
Right.
And so what
Yep.
would the purpose of a reserve, and I'm not saying I don't
No.
want it, I just want to understand, what would we use that for in the future?
You wouldn't, it would just be to have cash in the bank at all times.
Okay.
That just keeps you from going to zero, basically. That would be the only purpose, and that's why, I mean, my recommendation would be to keep it at a lower number, especially since you don't have a lot of cash right now, or to build cash over time, you
And I
know, if
hate
you wanted to
when
fund something
that
big.
account goes to zero.
Yeah, so do I. I don't like that at all, but
Agreed.
it's really just more at the purview of the board. Like I said, there's nothing
Right.
established that says we have to. That
Yes.
was just a recommendation.
I couldn't think of anything, Julie, thank you.
Yep,
Well,
of course.
let me give you an example. We get to the first of the year and we have need for outside consultants for some reason, and we have no cash. What are we gonna do?
There you go. That's the only reason I've heard so far. That's,
And
thank you, Fred.
some of that potential project money could be used for that too. Like I said, I just made an assumption based on a number that sounded reasonable that you might use for some sort of funding every year.
Right.
And then, of course, you could use fund balance beyond that, just a matter of what do you want your buffer to be? So,
So a clarifying point, the question's been tossed around, and I may get in front of you on this question to her, but
Trying to stop it.
are we restricted on what money we can spend? I heard you say, you said you couldn't spend any more than your current. Does the law or the setup of this keep us from committing to projects,
so the ordinance,
future
the
income?
ordinance, the way I read it, says you can't issue debt. And I think within your procedures is where, you know, to Mr. Gamble's point, one of his points in his SOP that he sent was not using money you don't have yet or unearned revenue to commit to future projects, so that basically you're not pre-committing a board that isn't here yet to take money out of whatever their budget may be to pay for a project. There's nothing that is in the ordinance that I could see that outlines it that way. That would kind of be a procedural decision, I would think, or internal
But if
policy.
the city came to us and said, hey, we've got this big, oh gosh, I don't know, infrastructure project we need to do in the Tirz system that's gonna revolutionize the business district down here.
Right.
Don't ask me what it is, I don't know. And this is a $10 million project. And we need Tirz board to put up $1 million a year
There's
over the
nothing,
next 10 years.
yeah, there's nothing keeping you from
Commit to
doing that at
that.
this point.
Huh?
There's nothing keeping you from doing that at this point.
But that is possible under current rules, but maybe not under our write-up. Is
Right,
that what I'm hearing?
right. That's right.
Is that,
And we can maybe get into that a little bit more when we get to that item on the
Okay.
agenda, but, you know, I just kind of wanted you to know what the cash flow build out, my purpose was, or at least my thinking, so you could see something out beyond today.
But we're restricted by state law in the city committing to something for 7 years. The budget has to be approved every year. And so technically, it's gotta be approved every year.
Unless it's
We're not-
CIP, you know, there's multiple caveats to that, because, you know, for example, use the public safety facility, it's gonna take multiple years. We bring
It's
that
the
back,
bond for that, that's different.
but other
This-
CIP projects,
This money
once,
is coming from the budget. This goes into the city's approved budget every September.
that's right, but let's say it was a multi-year project. This board could approve your portion of the multi-year, council could sign off on the multi-year. If we knew we were committing for $5 million and the contracts are in place, it's basically allocated money out of CIP, but it has to be, it's funded first. We would never bring to you a project that wasn't funded and say, we want to do this $5 million project, but we want you to commit to it, but it's not funded. Obviously, council can't approve something that isn't funded.
Let me see it a different way.
Okay,
I rent properties to municipalities in the state.
right.
And they are, many of them, multiple years.
Mhm.
But every year, it has to get approved in the budget, and if it doesn't get approved in the budget, they don't
Right,
have to pay me.
you'll see an out in the contract for that
Right,
almost all
yeah,
the time. I've seen it
always.
100 times. It says
Always,
in,
that's my point.
subject to budget allocation. However, on a project, you wouldn't just stop it midstreams. There's a lot of little caveats.
So we
That,
can do that, but there always is that caveat,
Yeah.
that it's gotta be approved in this, in the city council's budget.
correct.
Okay.
And that's part of our long-range CIP plan, that you see that 10-year plan, and it'll say, this is the total, this is how it's funded, and this is what we anticipate using year over year.
Okay.
So, yeah. So, okay, well, I'm gonna turn it over to,
I guess, I don't know, I was still confused, but that's all right.
Let me-
I think we have to wait until we get an example.
Let me say it a different way.
Okay,
We get a city council that doesn't like what
Yes.
we've approved. They don't have to put it in the budget. And so we've made a 7-year commitment that the city council doesn't approve in the next year's budget. It doesn't happen.
no, I understand that, but nothing that we do, we don't do anything that the council doesn't approve.
Right. But the next council has to also approve
The
it.
next council, that's what I would say, we're gonna build a new city hall.
Right.
It's gonna.
But that's a bump. Oh, new city hall.
I shouldn't have said that.
I
I
got
shouldn't have said
you.
that. God.
We're gonna build something new.
We're gonna build something new in the Tirz that's going to
Right.
have a significant impact. The city council, we in the city council agree that we ought to be committing to funding that over the next 5 years, because it's gonna be staged in over 5
Right.
years.
Got it?
All I'm saying is I thought we could commit that future revenue to that project over the next 5 years.
We can, but every city council during that 5 years has to approve that next piece. I just wanna make the point, cause to me, it's important.
That's a good point. That's a good point. But if the first city council, okay,
I'm not trying to argue, I'm just saying that each city council has to approve it, because it has to be approved in every annual budget.
yes, understand.
yeah, I mean, they would have to undo a contract, an ordinance, a resolution,
it.
but there's never a never. I mean,
Never, I
That's why you have
Been-
lawyers.
yeah,
rented
yeah.
real estate to municipalities for a long
Yeah,
time.
and when we go into those kind of agreements that are one-off kind of things, there's always that contract, there's always that clause in the
It's in
contract.
every
If
contract.
we're
of
building
ours.
something that we know is gonna take 3 years, it wouldn't make sense to stop in the middle and go, okay, well, there's the slab, but we're done.
No, I get it.
Yeah, depends on the, everything's, what's happening.
You know it
basically.
happens.
Good discussion. Any further questions? Sorry. All right, we can move on to item 4B, project status update. Mr. Burr?
Good afternoon, gentlemen. So what we've kind of talked about is giving you an example. I don't have any printouts for you yet, because what I've got here is an example of what I present to council. The intent that my focus was, Drew had me get the Tirz boundary, is to show you anything, not just Tirz funded, but anything that's happening in that zone. So a few little project updates that we've got. Heart of the Hills Heritage Center, AC Shriner House, however it's known, right over here across from the parking garage. We're still in the design process of a design build contract. We're looking at September to complete that. Then that's gonna come to council for approval of what's called the GMP, Guaranteed Maximum Price. Then that's when essentially the construction will go. It's not gonna be a construction contract, because it's gonna be the same group, but that process will come to fruition in September, October timeframe. Similarly, on the parking garage itself, cuts. So as I'm talking, think about what you might want to see on this project spreadsheet. Cuts has a public-private partnership. KPOB has taken down most of the overhead utilities. I think they're still waiting on Windstream to get the poles out. They're doing underground. In parallel, the city did the three-way stop. Cuts painted the crosswalks. That's kind of part of a big parking garage streetscape beautification process. We're in the process of finalizing the landscaping plans and scope. So that part the beds are there. We're just going to get that done once contracts are signed. That project should be done by this fiscal year, weather permitting. Similarly, annual street maintenance, you'll see that on the list. I don't have a full recollection of what streets we do have in here, but I will identify on the project update that you will receive what exact streets are going to be on this. I know E and F are on there because we've internally done some water main improvements, so we want to go back in, get you a nice surface on top of that. more of that beautification element. Downtown River Trail, so you talk about projects that seem, somewhat volatile. This is a project that we're looking at potentially asking EIC to wait until the 2025 call for projects through the Transportation Alternatives Project or program. What that will do is allow us to submit from the library to G Street versus, right now, the scope is from the library to the downtown pavilion here. We've asked EIC about that to kind of consider that last meeting. We're going to rehash it in the next meeting. And so that will be on here as well. Callow Theater improvements. Basically, we've got some roof and AC issues, and that is within your zone. What that's going to do is bid probably July, August timeframe, come up and basically procure all the materials, let the contractor get that stuff, and we'll shut down the theater in early 2025. We've talked with Jeffrey with PTK, and so that's probably going to be, Michael, I don't know if you remember the exact, I think it was September of next year, September, October of next year, when we're going to reopen that to the public. They've got a couple of big programs that they're we're trying to get in front of, making sure that we don't impact those. So, and lastly is the one that you guys have put money in. That's what we refer to as the downtown CDBG, Community Development Block Grant Program. That's the intersection of Earl Garrett and Water. I don't know if you've driven lately, but as of yesterday, we actually activated the light for timing. We're still waiting on some components, so it's just timing based right now. I know there's going to be constituents out there that aren't liking that, but we're waiting on some radar elements so that it will be zone activated based off the volume of traffic. And then a new project that we've got coming up, council just authorized us, and we do have a portion of it in your zone, is the Quinlan and Galbraith water line replacement. We're going to get rid of some old lines, basically from Quinlan, from 27 up to the stadium tanks. Now, part of that is an alternate bid, but we need to upgrade that line to PVC because it's been one of our problematic areas. So from an investment standpoint, that's going to be water sewer revenue, but there may be some commercial impact on that for potential development, fire flow, anything like that. So that's all I've got, but I am open for any questions, comments of what you would like to see. If you got any project specific questions, feel free to let me know.
So is your purview basically the public projects, or are you aware of private projects?
We're aware of some. If it has either a financial impact, like cuts, for example, that's private. So if it has a public-private partnership, then we put it on here. Similarly, Peterson, for thinking EIC on what we kind of track through that had a little component early on for the public infrastructure, but we've left it on the EIC list for a while because they were funding part of that surgery center. Trying to think what other ones we just did recently, but no. So if there is a project that you're interested in receiving updates, just let us know. I know HEB's already done, but if that was coming to fruition now, we would put that on the list if you were interested in something.
Well, it would be, and the reason for my question is it would be interesting to see if we could help some of the private improvements improve the dollars we're getting into the fund with our money. And so it's kind of like maybe a little bit of a payback. And so I just didn't know if there were situations where you guys were asked about, I'm sure you're asked for permitting. So, at that point, do you recognize any places that are in the private sector where part of this fund could be used? And that's probably something to think about for another meeting. But again, that would be interesting to see.
And we do similar with development. We have in the CIP budget every year, we have oversizing. So even though a development may need an 8-inch water main, we have a master plan on the water system that says, hey, that needs to be a 12. So we will EIC or whatever water sewer money we have to allocate that oversize, and so then we will track it. So anything you spend money on will be on a project list. But if there's others that, even though you may not be spending money on it from a Tirz standpoint, it has a public interest within your zone. And the intent right now, unless you say otherwise, is to put it on this list. So.
Well, I do know that my past life on EIC, there was a thought process we went through, which was, hey, if we can generate more tax revenue, it's more money into the fund, and that fund has continued to grow, grow, grow. And I just think it's probably something we should think about with this fund. That's my purpose for asking.
All right, any other questions?
And we can look at, kind of adding to that list, not just the infrastructure improvements, but the private development, at least active building permits or active projects.
Then we could develop a plan of some sort to entice the private sector to utilize the fund to
Okay.
improve their whatever project they're doing to some degree that would increase the value, so.
Well, and doesn't that fit with the financial plan? I mean, there's a certain, 25% for economic development grants, and there's 10% for streets and 10% for water and sewer, and, I mean, I agree 100%. In thinking about that financial plan, that's exactly what we need to do. Help those kinds of things invest that actually add to the value that then grow the fund.
Yeah. And I agree, when I first got on EIC, I thought, man, what a waste of my time having to be on here and watch us put pipes in the ground. And then I watched it actually have a benefit to the community. And, you know, it took a little bit for that to come to fruition, but I've seen it work. And so, my opinion of that is way different today. So, again, any other questions? All right, let's move on to, section number 5, item 5A. City of Kerrville CIP process. Mr. Barron?
So, Mr. Early, I've been the recipient of some of the pipes y'all put in the ground, and believe me, they're much appreciated. So
Yeah.
thank you for your service on the EIC board. Today I'm here to, maybe we got a little flip-flop there with Kyle, but I'm more here to talk to y'all about the private sector, or excuse me, the public sector, and how how our CIP process works. Just as a little insight to the city, I know a bunch of y'all have been on different boards, and a lot of y'all have been to tons of different meetings. I think it's kind of nice to put it all in a nutshell so you can see from another enterprise fund, not necessarily Tirz enterprise fund, but how a project starts at the city and how we carry it all the way through, and getting those funding places in place and multi-year stuff, and how all that kind of plays out. So I'll just take a few minutes of y'all's time and at least tell you how we do it on the utility side, and then y'all can use that knowledge to funding projects for the Tirz, and just know the city process as it unfolds typically. So so this is going to be how the whole process works. First, we identify the need. In the utility fund, we look at our system. We have a specific amount of money that we can spend. Some years it's about $1 million, and other years it's more. And if not, then we have to go out for bonds and things like that. But how do we prioritize which projects that we want to spend that money on, and where do we think the biggest bang for our buck is? So in over the past 15 years or so, we've done a number of different plans. Those plans have the utility ourselves, or all of our employees, we're able to identify what the needs are. But as you build in those different needs in different departments, is it the water side or the wastewater side or the collection or the distribution or the laboratory, which one is the biggest need in the utility? And so we've actually done some studies in some of those, similar to what y'all would look at across the board from what you were just talking about. Is it a private fund or public fund project? Is it a street project? Is it a new sidewalk? Is it new lighting? Is it, you know, which one is the most important one? In the utility side, back to that, we actually looked at who do they affect the most. If I have a project, if I only have $1 million, I got $20 million worth of need, how do I pick out which one really is the most important? Because I can promise you the most important project in the city is the one right outside your house, right? And whose ever house that is, that's the one that needs to be worked on first. But we've got to boil that down into a real good way that we can explain away this is where we want to be. And on the utility side, I know this may not be as irrelevant, but the more people it affects, the higher the priority of that project. So if I have something that goes wrong at my water treatment plant or my wastewater plant, those two plants serve the whole community. It gets a whole lot higher rating than a line that's in a street that serves 20 or 30 people. And so we look at it from how many people is it going to affect, how many times a day does it get used, that type of things, and we build that in, and then we're able to prioritize those projects. As we prioritize those projects, we build the list, and we get that cost for each one of those projects, and we identify a funding source. So now we've got the priority, we know the cost, the way we get the cost is quite simply talking to an engineering firm and say, hey, how much is it gonna be to fix a clarifier? Most of the projects that Kyle has on his list there, I would probably say half of them are utility projects. So we do a lot of this type work in the city. He does a ton of work for the utility. But we boil that down, we talk to those engineers, get a cost for how much is it gonna be, talk to Julie, our funding source, whoever, or whatever that might be. Is it bonds? Is it the normal cost of the utility ratepayers? How are we gonna build that in? We build that together, we build those two pieces together, cost, price, and then we go to council. Like Bruce was talking about earlier is, can we fund multi-year projects or not? It all has to go through council. Once council says, okay, yes, we're gonna build this project, or we agree with you, this is a good project, it makes sense, we have the money, you've identified to us, hey, this is where the funds are coming from, this is where the need is, they both come together, we bring it to council, council gets to make the decision. I don't get to make the decision, they do it. And they say, yes, we agree with you, or no, Stuart, they don't say that very often on project-wise, because it's a big process. After you lay all that out for them, it's kind of hard to say, hey, they do say, have you considered X? Have you considered Y? And you have to answer those questions. But as you look at it from an overall perspective of what's the most important thing, as you lay out all the facts, it becomes pretty clear that you've done your homework and you know what that looks like. But then they get to say, yes, and this is very similar to what y'all are going to be doing, is laying that process out. Council, this is what we recommend. We've come together as a board. We've heard all these concerns in our district. We have 15 projects that we've kind of kicked through and looked around. We think this is the way to go forward. Do you agree with us? Are you willing to kind of support our funding recommendation to you? And then they'll say, yes, you can do it, or hey, have you considered X? Have you considered Y? And they'll, you'll back and forth until you get to a place where you can actually jump off on that project. The multi-year funding thing is most of our projects are multi-year, but it's only one-time funding. So I may go and say, hey, I need a new clarifier, or I need a new pipe, or whatever that is. I might go to them the day before the end of the budget year. But as soon as they allocate that money, then it's put aside to fund those projects. I don't have to go back because that's funded already by that particular council. Even though it's multiple years, Julie puts it it takes it out of the normal operational budget and puts it in the CIP budget, what Kyle was just going through, and that banks it there until that project's built. But the question that Bruce had earlier is, if you're going to do a multi-year funding agreement, those have to be visited every year by council. So after we get that through council, get it approved, then Kyle's group starts on it and they go through the design process. Really, what is it going to look like to when we really build that thing? And he bids it out. Hopefully that bid comes back in at the estimate that the engineer gave us before we went to council. Council gets another bite at the apple then, once it's funded. It's already been funded. We've gone out to bid. We've got the bids back. And we go to council, say, here's this project we talked about last time. We thought it was $1 million project. Turns out it's $1.1 million. Y'all still on board, or it's 900,000, whatever that is, and then they can award that, the construction piece of it, and then it's underway to get started. So in a nutshell, that's kind of how the public side works. I know it's a little different than the private side. There's a bunch of, there's at least 2 trips to council in that scenario, and a little bit of homework on the front end, but that's the way we do it in the utility side. And I think that this board is going to be very similar in that process of building that momentum with these different projects and getting council on board and ultimately getting their approval. Boy, they're dropping like flies. So, do you have any questions?
I do. So going back to that, we can't issue debt. This may be a question for Julie. We can't issue debt, but we could fund something in a year that might pay out over several years, just like one of your projects.
Yes. But so if you have $1 million right now and you're saying, we're going to phase this work and it's going to take me $3 million, I'm going to hire the same engineer, I'm going to hire the same team, but it's going to take me 3 years to build it. The funding is, as long as it's in place already, it's spoken for. And then you can build it in a 2 years, 3 years, 3 months, whatever it takes to build it, as long as it's been funded up front.
Thank you, that's what I needed.
Okay, but I wanna make sure I understand what you're saying. Because it's one thing to take $500,000 is what we have right now. We could fund a $500,000 project, even though we would only release the funds over 3 years. That's different than funding a $1.5 million contract, knowing that we will have a pretty steady income coming in.
Right?
The first scenario is a single contract.
Yes.
You're under a single contract to expend your $500,000. In your second scenario, you're under almost a single contract, but over a 3-year period where you're going to have to re-up every year. You got to go back to council and say, hey, we still support this. It'll all be spelled out in the original contract that we're signing up for 3 years, but you're still going to have to go back to them every year and have them reaffirm that and say, yes, you're still good to go.
Get it funded.
But council still does all that approval.
Just, I understand all that, and
Okay.
I'm okay with it. A technical question though, who gets the interest on the $500,000 we set aside? You do. It stays with us?
Stays in your fund, I believe.
That's
So
just curious.
let's just say you committed to $500,000.
Yeah.
Typically what we do is Trina manages our CIP projects. If she was gonna transfer $50,000 out, we transfer out in different ways. Every contract's written a little bit different, but if we say to you, we're gonna transfer it out every month, or every time there's an expense that month, we're gonna net it and move the difference over, but the cash stays with you until that project goes to CIP. So we started doing that a few years ago, I think when interest rates started going up, and it made a difference.
I'm sure.
When interest rates are 0.5%, you don't see it as much, but right now you do, so.
Thank you.
Thank you, good question.
Other questions?
And that happens in all of them, like we've sold bonds for, street projects or drainage. That bond money stays in that, and we actually, the interest that's made in there that we try to spend as fast as we can, but some of these projects take a little time to get off the ground. Okay, thank you.
Thank you,
Thank
sir.
you.
Thanks, Stuart.
All right, we'll move on to item 5B, which is the Kerrville 2050 comp plan update. Mr. Paxton?
Thank you, sir. Good afternoon. As we talked last time, you guys did offer to fund the additional contract for the downtown plan to coincide with the comprehensive plan update. So council also approved that contract amendment, and we had our, initiation meeting with Freese and Nichols 2 hours ago. So I've got a small update for you. Did kind of go through a preliminary schedule and kind of how and when the downtown plan is going to fall into that year-long process of the comprehensive plan update. So we're looking at probably end of June, beginning of July, having a kind of kickoff meeting with Freese and Nichols city tour and kind of working with staff to kind of gather their data. Then we'll come back. They'll launch website. Start on their market analysis, vision, goals, and principles update. Then moving into the fall, probably October timeline, we'll have a public event for the comprehensive plan update. The comprehensive plan advisory committee will meet, which will most likely be Planning and Zoning Commission. The downtown advisory committee, the Tirz board, will meet. Plus you will have one liaison from Main Street and one liaison from the Historic Downtown Business Association join you for those meetings. They'll start going through kind of visioning and scenarios that they've put together, getting feedback from the board and the public, and then kind of go through that iterative process. And November into possibly January, maybe February, because it's always tough with the holidays. Have a second meeting with the downtown committee. Most likely that'll be virtual because they're limited on the number of trips they're going to make to Kerrville. So they'll go over those different scenarios and what they got from the first meeting and public input. Kind of, like I said, iterative process back and forth to dial in what that downtown plan looks like. And then towards the end of that kind of early winter, January, February, a trip back out to meet with the downtown committee and comprehensive plan committee to kind of go over the final drafts, if you will. In the midst of that, the comprehensive plan committee will be working on a small area plan around Nimitz Lake, which would be kind of a comparable project to downtown plan. And the comp plan kind of carries on a little further into implementation and action items. So I'll go through those different chapter updates and the Nimitz plan and identify implementation action items, looking at final presentation to P&Z and council in June of 25. So we're looking forward to kind of scheduling out y'all's meetings ahead of time, especially knowing that we're going into holiday season, making sure we're not creating more conflicts than we need. But we'll be reaching out on some of those may be called meetings because we're trying to time the comprehensive plan committee and the downtown plan committee basically in the same trip so that Freese and Nichols can be here on site and we can limit the virtual meetings. If we can't get that timing to work, then the downtown advisory committee may have virtual meetings with Freese and Nichols, and we'll figure out logistics on that as we get there.
All right.
Any questions?
So first, do you feel like that will be completed by September of 2025?
Yes, it'll be adopted. The plan is to be adopted in June of 25.
Okay. And then does the downtown, what'd you call it, the downtown
Advisory committee.
Does it consist of the entire board or certain appointed members of the board?
The entire Tirz board plus one from Main Street and one from HDBA.
We just have 4 of our 7 members are rolling off.
Moving out.
Yep, and don't have the ability to go back on. So I
right.
wanted there to be consistency, and if we were gonna appoint, wanted to try to appoint, knowing that going forward, so.
Yes, that's a great point. Those incoming appointees need to have those conversations that they're gonna have a little extra work on the downtown plan, along with the traditional Tirz work that you guys have been doing. So,
Well, should some of us resign so that
They can get the right
so the
people
council
on.
can put people on here now
I'm
and
thinking,
participate in that?
I'm wondering the same thing, John.
And truly, I think that's
we're,
you don't need us that are being limited out.
Downtown plan,
It is.
So, we talked about that earlier today with Freese and Nichols. And the downtown portion isn't gonna start, like the meetings with Tirz and the Main Street and HCBA until October, and y'all's terms turn right at that point. So it'll really be a good jumping off point for whoever the new members are in October when they start. So y'all don't have to feel the need to step off now, because the work that's gonna be done prior to October is gonna be more focused on that, the entirety of the city, the whole comp plan study. So the downtown portion will start really in October.
Okay, good,
So
good.
y'all could rest assured that
So is there any money that we need to spend on this thing while we're still here before we are gone? I'm playing.
Drew, I had one question just since I was absent at the last meeting. What was the definition of downtown?
that'll probably be to be determined. I mean,
Okay.
First we looked at the downtown arts and culture zoning area
Right.
as a boundary. It could be as large as the Tirz, although the Tirz zone isn't, you have the map up there, don't you? Yeah.
There it is.
For those not familiar, the downtown arts and culture district is probably I'd say the north half of the Tirz boundary. That south half is actually zone mixed use, the kind of the piece coming down Broadway and Water Street after the turn. So we could tailor it to be more downtown or more downtown core, or expand it to be the entire Tirz.
But we don't know what that is yet.
No, not
Okay,
yet.
that's part of the study.
Correct.
Okay, thank you.
And that'll be part of the input from this committee as well,
Okay.
and citizens, so.
Questions?
And then like the current comprehensive plan, the downtown chapter will be updated with the new master plan, a whole list of action items. Ideally, that could be some project lists that you guys could then consider for future funding and prioritization. Some of it may not be necessarily projects that Tirz would do. It could be private projects that are just noted. We've seen that with the comp plan as well. Some of them are action items the community wanted, but it's really a private entity or another partner that's going to take care of those. So should have a pretty wide breadth of projects identified. Anything else?
Doesn't sound like it.
Sounds great. Thank you, guys.
Thank you.
Thank you.
All right, moving on to section 6, item 6A, the Tax Increment Reinvestment Zone Board Procedures. Julie?
Okay, so I think we kind of got a little bit side wound last time, and so I thought just bring us back to basics a little bit. Y'all have this presentation in front of you, and also I emailed it out to you. And we don't have to go through all of it, but just I kind of went back to the original ordinance, the original setup documents, and said, okay, well, what do we do in here really? And kind of to answer some of your questions that came up last time, just out of discussion. And so I gave you a slide about goals. These are outlined specifically within the financing and project plan that was set up back in 2018. So gave some specific goals as far as what this board is to do as we look at funding projects and those kind of things. And basically anything that's going to develop the area to, continue to provide additional income so that we can continue to promote the area. So streets, water and sewer, parks and open spaces, and economic development grants. And I think that was kind of what you were hitting on a minute ago, and how that kind of works. And there's a whole lot of rules in Chapter 311 about that, but it's pretty specific as far as what you can and can't do within a Tirz. Basically, if on the financing plan overview, this was how it was laid out within the financing plan and within the original project plan as far as how things were to be spent. Now, keep in mind, the cost estimates were back in 2018. And I think that's why the percentages were applied because, we know good and well that those aren't relevant now. So costs can be revised, things can get moved from one line to another line, and so all those things are outlined really clearly in the setup documents that I also provided to you in case you need to look back at those for specifics. But if we were to change anything as far as what's in that plan, not necessarily dollars, but if we were to make big changes to types of projects that were going to be funded, then we would have to modify the original Tirz document back with the comptroller. So we talked about proposed procedures, and thank you, Mr. Gamble, for what you sent. I kind of took some of that, incorporated it with some comments that I kind of took away from last meeting, and then just some ideas that we've had along the way as Drew and Michael and I have met and talked through kind of what does it look like or what maybe it should look like. And this is very preliminary, so definitely, open to whatever suggestions you have. The reason I gave you the board procedures is because some of the things are already outlined within what's legal and what we're able to do. And so I didn't include those in your proposed procedures because those are already outlined. So I didn't figure there was any important duplicate in it. But basically on the proposed sheet that I gave you, the general basically just outlines what has to happen. I did go ahead and put established meeting dates on there. I am not usually, thank you, Keisha, for being the one who has to find a date where everyone can be here. And I know, we present to EIC all the time and we know it's the third Monday. So I thought it would be helpful, just to say, okay, X month on X Wednesday at X time, that's when we're going to meet. And that way, trying to get 7 people in a room at the same time is really hard when you don't have something established. So Michael and I talked and we kind of decided the 2 meetings are necessary because we have to talk about budget and then we have to do an annual report. But we went ahead and put the other 2 on there, kind of these are as needed. So if there's business that needs to be taken care of. And then with the understanding, or my recommendation would be to put something in there to other meetings as needed. So as Drew spoke, there's probably a need for a meeting in October. That wasn't one of my meetings. I kind of tried to space them out once a quarter. So there could be some other things that come up as we're doing special projects. So again, that was just my outline, kind of collaborating all the documents together in one. The financial, again, adopt the annual budget, review, so I'm getting ahead of myself here, review the cash flow forecast. And this is something we do for every single entity that we have. We do it for the general fund, We do it for total operations for the city, we do it for EIC, so I don't know why we wouldn't do it for y'all. It just gives you a bigger look at what your outlook is, because it's one thing to look at $500,000 in the bank right now, but what does that look like over 10 years? And so do we have a big project that we want to say, we're going to reserve X, and those things can be done, not necessarily through policy, but just through practice. I did add the reserve fund. That was one of Mr. Gamble's requests, and never a bad idea to have some sort of reserve. Review and approve the annual financial report that we provide to you, and then consider projects that align with the creation of the Tirz as we outlined it there for you. We have the master plan, of course, that's there and in the works, and so that master plan then would add to another piece of your guide. And then make funding recommendations to City Council for Tirz funded projects. So I'm just going to go through the rest of these, and then you guys can give us some feedback, and we can bring those back to you at a later time. And then the other thing that we talked about, a lot of things last time, is how do we consider projects? So how do you want to see projects brought to this board? I mean, there was some discussion about, do they come directly from City Council? Do they come from staff to you guys directly, then to City Council? And at the end of the day, I don't think anyone wants to be surprised, but they kind of have to start somewhere. So when there's a smaller amount of funding, I think the idea was, if you don't have council support, then there's no point in us talking to you guys anyway, because it's going to be a multiple funded project at this point in time, unless it were something small that you guys could do for yourself. You know, I kind of outlined it as things come in through EIC, so they do come to staff first, typically to Michael's office or whomever he has assigned in the economic development world, to kind of vet those a little bit, to make sure they actually align, so that we're not bringing you projects either from us or from the public that don't align. So then also you would be able to have a heads up on those ahead of time through your agenda packets or communication with, you know, whoever your liaison is. So I kind of outlined that there, and so we're just really looking for feedback on, you know, what do you think about how projects should come to you, what projects, you know, I think, again, the master plan is going to provide some direction on that. So anything that staff brings you, of course, would have to align with Tirz project plans or the master plan. Could come from recommendations from the Tirz board, as we talked about last time. If there's something specific that you said, hey, you know, we really want to look at these economic development grants, and how does that look? Or there's a specific one I'd like to consider. Hopefully those are some conversations we're having ahead of time, so that we can look at what funding looks like and those kind of things. So we're bringing you good information and having productive meetings. Recommendations from council, citizens, business owners, developers, or anything like that. And then projects for consideration would be presented by staff. That's typically the way we prefer to do it. Doesn't mean that's how it has to happen, but it's because we've been able to work through the funding piece, because that's always going to be the question mark, is how are we going to pay for it, no matter what we do. And so if we're able to kind of do some homework on things we know are going on ahead of time, work through the process before we get to the request, we can make an educated request to you. And then Michael brought up a good point. We don't really have an application process, but as we've talked about, we haven't had a lot of money to spend. And so, you know, what does that look like in the future? You know, EIC has an application process. I know they have a lot more dollars to spend right now, but this board isn't just for today. And so what does that look like going down the road? You know, do we need that? Again, the economic development staff would typically intake those applications and then vet those, and then bring those to you as, you know, this was brought to me. Is this something you want us to consider? How much homework do you want us to do? And those kind of things before we step off into kind of next steps. So, and then anything eligible, of course, would be brought to you in exactly that manner. And then once we got to the point, of course, of funding, then it would fall kind of in line with the way Stuart described to you the typical process. But that was kind of just in a nutshell what we were kind of thinking. Let's simplify this. But really what we needed to know is, you know, what do you think? What things are specific? Not just that you personally would like to see, but what benefits future boards, and what makes sense from a business standpoint down the road. So that's kind of what we brought to you in a nutshell. So open to feedback, questions, comments, criticisms. I can take all.
Well, I guess I'll start. Last night I was at a social event, and Mindy kind of approached me and reminded me of the Go Team process at EIC, and that was a good process that when I served as chair of that for 4 years, that the Go Team would meet, and it was really the city staff and me as the chair. It doesn't have to be that way here. It can be whatever we make it, but it gave a heads up, and then that chairperson, liaison, whatever you want to call it, could then disseminate the information, and it's a whole lot better to do it like that than it is just bringing it into a meeting and
Right.
surprising everyone with what's this.
Right.
And so that seemed to really work for EIC. I had questioned a couple of the EIC current members as to whether or not that process is still in effect, and my understanding it is, but we do have one member of EIC questioning its viability. And so I think that conversation's coming back up. So if it works, great. If it doesn't work, tell us why that doesn't work at EIC. But I think a process like that would be a good way to keep everyone informed.
Okay.
And that seems to be what's been missing here. So from the feedback I've gotten from this
Okay.
board. So
Okay. And other things like, you want to talk about Go Team? I'm not as in the loop on, I know what it is, and yes, we use it, but,
So Kim Clarkson is asking us to like look at the composition. She's not looking at doing away with the Go Team. She's looking at just the process we go through and seeing if we need to tweak it a little bit. But the Go Team does review applications from community members and organizations. So private entities and community organizations. So like Habitat for Humanity is a good example. And then a private entity, private commercial entity looking to come to town like Megacrete. City projects don't go through that process. They go from the city to EIC. And so you've got those two tranches where you'd have Trail Boss, who's coming to town, let's say, come in with an application, ask and say, hey, we'd like some money for signage or something like that. Or the Doyle Center saying, hey, we've got a project that we think would be great. But Mr. Stone's project is a good example of a city project sort of sponsored by private individuals, like saying, this is a good idea, we think this is a good one. But that's a city project right on the street. And so you have, I think, really those three tranches. And so it works, the Go Team process works well for EIC.
and it's already there and it already works. Why not just kind of duplicate that process for this? And seems that that would be maybe a way for,
okay.
you know, things to happen in a more open manner, I guess.
Okay.
What do you guys think about that? I know I sent you a proposal how to add that into this.
I like the thought. I think it'd be predicated on an application process, which we don't have, and I think it's a great idea. It was included in some part of it.
Right.
Provide some structure for information.
What I didn't understand, because I've heard of the Go Team, the first time I understand it, really Go Team, as EIC deals with it, is external applications, internal staff-driven proposals is not.
We always did when I was on ESC. Internal came to the Go Team as well.
So that's not what they're doing today.
We don't do it now, no, sir. Not since I've been here.
And the River Trail was the primary one back in those days that would start, and because it was such a large project, dollar-wise, and, you know, then we were borrowing money on top of that to fund a lot of the projects. A lot of that stuff did come through the Go Team. I don't know what this looks like in the end, but
So
back then it did.
it's a little different for EIC, but y'all could work through the same process essentially. So what we do for city-initiated projects is staff approaches the council to say, do you all want to consider asking EIC to consider this? And then it goes to EIC and they just talk about it. And if they all agree that they want to move forward with the process, then they'll call a public hearing the following month. Now, y'all don't have to call public hearings, but I think I hear loud and clear, we have to bring it to you somehow, right? Whether it's the Go Team or we come talk to you, whatever it is, bring it to you as just a discussion topic, and then the following month or the following meeting, then y'all could consider it. We can do it that route, which would essentially be a 4-part process. Talk to council about whether or not they want to approach y'all to discuss it, mull it over, questions, whatever. And then if you want to move forward with it, take it to the following meeting and then it would go back to council for final ratification. That, for city-initiated projects, that's what we do with EIC.
Would that be enough heads up? Because that's what I'm hearing is, don't bring us something the day of and ask us to make a decision.
Yeah, and that's kind of what, the message is.
Yeah.
I would agree with that.
And I think the difference is, or the only, I don't want to call it a snag, but that when you don't meet every month, then, sometimes that can, so that would then require potentially, like Michael said, if he brings you something and said, do you want to consider this? I guess you could give direction to, we want to go ahead and make a decision on this, or we don't. But it matters where it is on the agenda, but then I guess you could say, we're going to table it, bring it back to us, let's have a special called, or, hey, we're comfortable with this, let's go ahead and decide on that kind of thing, just because of the duration between your meetings is the only thing I would see the difference.
You could always call a special meeting, though.
100%,
Right?
yes.
Okay.
It's just really how do you
Something
want to see
could
it?
be set, and I don't know where you'd stick it, but let's say you stick it in potential future agendas. That could be, you come make a presentation, however wherever it gets put on the agenda, but it's not in consideration for possible action.
It could start,
Say, well, we want to have a special meeting next month to resolve this.
it could start an information and discussion, and then the consensus from the body is what we usually get, and then if there's consensus, then we take that to the next meeting for consideration.
Got it, so
Okay.
it'd be in 5, okay.
So have
But
a
it-
special meeting for consideration?
But if it's timing is an issue, we could call a special meeting to not wait until the next regularly scheduled meeting is
Okay.
really the only thing I'm trying to.
Yes,
Yeah, it wouldn't be practical probably to wait 3 months or
Right.
to, consider it. We usually want to move a little quicker than that if we can.
Without having a whole line of stuff in front of us, I don't really want to commit to a monthly meeting, but I wouldn't mind having an extra meeting if we need one, because there is something worthy of considering. Does that make sense?
it does.
Because I agree with you, it seems like we've had some stuff that was like, we were supposed to decide now, and I like to ruminate.
Well, you weren't here last meeting, and last meeting we had a $50,000 ask that the decision had to be made at this meeting because the expense or the commitment for the expense had to happen in 3 days.
I saw that after the
So,
fact when I read the meeting.
Yeah.
And
so,
that
yeah,
could
I
have come
mean-
up that fast, and I'm not saying it happens that way every time, but.
And I think that was a special consideration that we already were going to do an update to the comp plan.
Right.
And then that came up as a potential, so. But yeah, in a perfect world, you would see it before you make action on it, and that's what I'm hearing.
Yeah.
Okay.
We're just grumpy old men.
It's all right. Hey,
They're gonna make a new board at
Yeah.
some point.
Yeah.
And they probably will
Necessarily
need
be
to.
grumpy old
They
men.
probably will be
Well,
too.
and my whole point of bringing up the Go Team is to get some kind of process in there, because as this money starts growing, and I anticipate it'll grow faster than what y'all projected.
Yeah, it was
because
a
the value
conservative
of
growth
homes have
on,
Gone up.
Yep.
And so, and commercial property.
Mhm.
So my guess is that, it will be something in the next 5 years that you'll have to deal with.
yeah, that's why
Well,
we,
And I think for us too, from a staff standpoint, as Stuart alluded to, that process for projects is, do we want to do one of these? Here's a cost estimate, right? So I know in Mr. Stone's case, the Shriner Roundabout, that thing is north of $1 million in the estimate, right? Which is still just an estimate, and y'all have less than that at this point. But the first step in that process is the engineering. And so, we heard discussions about that, and so we kind of constantly go get quotes from folks and how much is this going to cost. And so we're looking to get that information from our engineers to see what that would be, right? And that's the first step in that process. And so nobody's funded that. No, that's not on that list right now for city projects, and so we don't have that funding identified. So I think I'd like to know, staff would like to know from the board as a part of that process, 10% of that estimated project cost is engineering. And so that's an applicable use of the funds from y'all. And if it's worth looking at that Because we don't know what that fee, we don't know what that cost is gonna be until they engineer it all out, right? And it may be that that's 5 years from now before that project can come to this body to consider, right? As a fully funded major project.
And for me, what I would expect would work very well in that situation is maybe the ask for us is to do the engineering, just to see if this is feasible.
Yeah.
And so we end up spending $110,000 on engineering. And then say, well, you know what, this is a $7 million project, no, we're not gonna do it.
Yeah.
So maybe the ask is not to participate in the project, but to at least fund the engineering piece of it.
Yeah.
Because, I mean, somebody's gonna have to pay for the engineering if we think it's a good enough project.
Anything else procedural wise that y'all like?
I
had a-
like what this, I like the addition of the go team, language that our chair has provided. So I would propose that we add that go team language into these. And I know they're just, or is it in the handout?
On these,
The
it's in
latest
there.
handout.
I agree.
Yeah.
Okay.
If you wanna,
Yes, for the one you did?
yeah.
Yeah,
Yes.
I
so
agree.
I just propose we add that in there.
And y'all can
These are
devise
these are
that,
working documents.
yes.
Sure.
And you can devise the go team piece, how it fits. If the city projects don't fit in the go team module, that's fine. And that probably then requires a definition of what
Okay.
the go team is and who the members are. And so, but again, I kind of threw that together, this afternoon, so.
Okay.
Brad,
Anything
you have a
else?
question?
Well, yeah, just a comment, I would personally take out that members of this board could recommend projects.
Okay,
I would want to see the projects come from somewhere else other than this board. I
Okay.
don't want us to go there.
okay. And again, the
For
master
lots of
plan,
very-
master plan could
lots of
change a
very,
lot of
very
things.
obvious reasons.
Sure, and master plan could change a lot of things too.
But this board could recommend it into the process.
Yeah, yes, but I would not
Not
want,
as a board member,
I would not want a member of this board to initiate,
Correct.
to be the initiator of a project directly to us, the same way that a citizen with property in the Tirz or
Okay.
a business would. I mean,
Well, I guess I'm less concerned about that, because when they do, they become off the board for that subject project. I mean,
Yep.
if Bruce, from his business standpoint, is involved in a big project, there's no reason it shouldn't be brought to the board. But when we consider it, he's outside the room, or he's not on the board.
I think my thinking on that was
Yeah.
more if you were in the community or, you know, you saw the garage streetscape or something like that needed to be brought. It wasn't necessarily meant for like private funding or anything, but that, I guess it could mean whatever you wanted it to mean. It was just more that if you had an idea, that it could be brought through that staff channel, just like anything else. But we can certainly remove that or change the language or whatever you choose to do, but I can see both sides of that for sure.
Yeah, I hadn't really thought about projects because I would certainly get out of the way. But I have thought about that we're in the mud, and we may see things that do fit this board that someone else hasn't thought about. And so I would think that would be appropriate, which ties into my question is that I think that Mr. Stone's project is very worthy, but one of the things that I am concerned about is that as a city, not necessarily as this board, but as a city, we've spent a lot of attention on the Clay Street area and that part of town. And how do we balance that out? Because the Tirz is much larger and it has different, you know, the northern piece is more the downtown arts and the southern piece is more mixed and Drew left, I'm sorry.
Yeah.
I want to say C1 and maybe some C2. And so how do we actually service the whole, do we just wait to see what comes to us, which is part of my reasoning for thinking about that. I've been thinking about what do we need to do to the southern part of Tirz with the resources that we have, but I don't see anybody bringing us a project. And I'm not trying, I'm just using you because you're sitting here, Mark.
Yeah.
And I go through that intersection so often, I would love to see a traffic circle there. But how do we balance that out? That to me is a real challenge as a, here on the board.
So I think, I was just gonna say, the one delta in this board is that this is a 30-year process, right? So that's a long time to acquire, the estimate was $17 million, right? And each of our projects, whatever they are, if it's a street reconstruction, that's gonna be north of $1 million every time, just about. I mean, we'll get lucky sometimes and have $300,000 or $400,000 projects, but those are not the norm. So it's an interesting process, and we need y'all's input on how you want to see it, because that is a great project, and it's the one that's been brought up. So
For me, the answer to your question is the 2050 plan update.
Okay.
I mean, that ought to be a key. How do we balance this potential $17 million over the 30 years out appropriately on the Tirz?
Okay, that's it. Thank you.
Let's just go borrow $17 million, put it in a fund and just.
Well, isn't that what we're doing?
That's kind of what we're doing, that's kind of what we're doing.
Okay,
Anyway.
good.
Good
So
job putting this together.
So, how are we going to memorialize that formally?
I can revise this, put it back together, and I guess we can do it at your next meeting. I'm not sure when that is. I'll have to look at my little,
Not like we have something coming through the process imminent, right?
we don't, mm-mm.
Well, you don't. I mean, I think the only thing, and this is where, it's always funny, when do we bring it up? When we get a cost from our street engineer on, say, that project right there, because we're actively sorting that out, right?
That one won't go through the process, so.
Well, you can't fund the construction of it, right?
Right.
At this point, we know that, but there's a possibility you could fund the engineering of it. So when we get that, if y'all want us to bring that back for a review to talk
I
about.
say call a special meeting when we're there.
Yeah.
We'll have
Yes, no.
August for budget.
Yeah.
That's the next scheduled thing.
Yeah, because I mean, it's gonna take a hot minute. It takes usually about anywhere from, I don't know, 5 to 8 months to do all the engineering typically on something that size. Is that a reasonable number? Yeah. And there's a deficit, so we have to go through the budget process right now anyway for everything. And we'll be sorting through CIP lists on how we're going to prioritize projects, and if there's a way to fit that in somehow, right? Stuart's got a long list of projects, right? So we're ranking those. But we could start with the engineering. We can bring that back to y'all.
Okay.
We
So
could probably
then
do that
that's
before.
If we have a
Time you
special
could
call, I could
memorialize
bring
it.
this back in a different format, which I would send out ahead of time too, and that way if we needed to make modifications to it, I could do that.
And we can vote on it then.
Then you could vote on it then, and barring something not happening in July, we could do it at our August meeting when we bring budget to you.
All right, that gets us through item 6A. Don't note anything for executive session unless I've not been brought up to speed, or unless you guys have something you want to go talk about. Nope. All right. Anybody have any possible items for discussion? Next meeting, any future agenda items, anything like that? Nothing in particular. All right, well, I hear nothing, so I'll take a motion to adjourn.
So moved.
We have a motion and a second. All those in favor, leave. Thank you.
Thank you.